Welcome in Rose City to Soccer Made in Portland. Ryan Clark here with Chris Reifer. Last pod from us for a couple of weeks.
That's right.
Mr. Reifer has a busy couple of weeks ahead. He's getting married, folks. He's out after this for a while.
A good long while, and by that I mean like a week and a half.
Yeah, just about a week and a half. But two games to talk about over this past weekend between the Timbers and Thorns, starting
kind of three. I guess technically the San Jose game happened after we recorded last time. Because
that's right.
Because recall, this isn't a self-serving recollection in any respect whatsoever. But please recall that I predicted that the Timbers would win that game.
You did, and
correctly.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, correctly so. So the Timbers,
real bold prediction. The Timbers are going to beat a team that's averaging about half a point per game.
And they messed around and almost
they did mess around
drew that
a little bit, but against San Jose you can mess around and not necessarily find out.
Sure. So they that was the first game. We might as well start there rather than the Vancouver game.
I think we just did it. Like that was it.
Yeah.
The Timbers messed around. They didn't find out because San Jose is a big pile of stink.
Yeah, they're a bad team, really bad team. It was a situation where the Timbers could have fallen back into a draw. That would have been pretty devastating against that bad of a team, but they didn't. They held on. They got the win. It's sort of like whatever. It's midweek here. You've got different players in different areas. It's fine. But the Vancouver game, I think definitely more convincing 2-0 win there, and one that I think signifies the legitimacy of the turnaround for the Timbers, as you pointed out. Obviously, a long way to go for them in the season, but this stretch that Phil Neville has this team playing, good defense, relatively consistent on that end of the field, and those DPs are showing up. Felipe Mora, obviously having a strong season. Evander, I think that, he's probably not going to win MVP. He probably won't even be top 3, 4, or 5 in voting. But I think he's playing it at MVP caliber right now and has showcased a level of playmaking that really, you think about the players around the league, there's only a couple of them you can think of that have done a better job setting up their teammates, and one of them is Lionel Messi. So you got to be proud of that.
The MVP race this year is unusually competitive.
Right.
Because you've got Chicho Arango just playing absolutely out of his mind in Salt Lake. You've got Messi. You've got some guys who are lighting it up sort of on a generational level. And so that's where the conversation is this year, and Evander's not in that conversation. But when you go down just to the next tier below that, he's absolutely in there. He's absolutely a guy who's going to be, on the field in the All-Star game. I think that would be a shocking omission at this point. He's certainly the kind of guy that, even with some of the positional crowding in his position at the top of the MVP race, he's going to be in real contention to be MLS best 11 if he continues at this trajectory. And so those are big superlatives, right? This is one of the best seasons that we've seen from a Timbers player in a Timbers uniform. The folks who there are only a couple folks who I think have put together seasons anywhere near this, and their names are Diego Valeri and Sebastian Blanco, and if you want to be kind of hipster about it, Diego Chara. And look, I think that he's deserving of all those superlatives because he's had a phenomenal season, but he's not in the MVP race.
Jonathan Rodriguez is somebody too, speaking to the 3 DPs for the Timbers, that has really come into his own and been a nice compliment to somebody like Evander, getting out into space and finding good spots to finish off goals. He's been, I think, a much improved presence over the last few weeks. Obviously, it takes time for a player to adjust to any team, to any league. And Rodriguez got off, I think, to a little bit of a slower start than folks were expecting, at least with the hype, that existed around his signing. But overall, I think been really strong. Those 3, they have what it takes to be like your solid, a very talented, one of the better attacking groups in MLS type groups.
Yeah, this is what we thought it was.
Yeah.
This is what we thought we were seeing even early in the season when they were scoring tons of goals but weren't necessarily winning games because the defense was a bit of a mess. A lot of a mess. This is who we thought they were. and it's a lot of attacking talent. It's a team that can absolutely compete with the overwhelming majority of MLS in that respect. And that's why I said early on that I think this is a team that's got the talent, the ability, the capacity within it to be competing in the top four of the West. Because like Jonathan Rodriguez is legit. He was a really good Liga MX player. He was a really good player at Club America for a while. And at other clubs within Liga MX, scored tons of goals, was really efficient. And it's not a surprise, especially given the closeness between the two leagues, that he would come into MLS and with maybe a little bit of an adjustment period, immediately start, or at least close to immediately soon, start producing with that kind of consistency in MLS. So none of that is surprising to me at all. It's what the Timbers bargained for when they got him. They paid a decent amount of money for a guy who's in sort of late prime, I would say, and they're getting what they paid for, and they're getting what they paid for in Evander, and so all of that is I think really positive. But that's not the difference. I mean, that's not what has made the difference between the Timbers, over the course of the last 5 or 6 weeks and the Timbers in the 5 or 6 weeks that preceded that. It's defensive. They're still scoring, a couple goals a game. It's just that they're not giving up 3.
It's 2-1 and 2-0 instead of 2-2 or 2-3, or whatever it might have been before. Difference wise, like in terms of how they're setting up, how they're adjusting to different game states in these last several weeks. Defensively, what has stood out to you overall, and why are they better?
They've been better with the ball, and they're not stretching themselves as much. They're not exposing themselves, and they've just been cleaner. I don't think it's anything that is dramatically different. I think the block is a little bit lower than it was. If you were to go back and look at some of those games from earlier in the season, they're being a little bit more compact when they're in that phase. That's certainly helpful. But I think it's kind of just minding the P's and Q's of the rest defense a little bit better, and being a little bit cleaner with the ball than they were, and that's all really important. That's the kinds of stuff. That's just the sorts of structural things that you need to do to be a successful team, and it's not necessarily that they've had this big tactical revolution. They haven't, when they employed a totally different system. Or anything like that. They've made some tweaks here and there, but they've also just gotten a lot cleaner. And, that stuff they need to continue to mine, right? Because I agree entirely that the Vancouver win is one of the best of the season, and not because of it was so spectacular, but because it was kind of mundane. Even before the red card, it was a pretty routine 2-0. And after the red card, the game was over. Yeah, and not in a way where I was disappointed that the Timbers didn't, put it to 3 or 4. It was the third game of the week. They were up 2-0 against a 10-man opponent. They kind of played it out. And that's great.
Yeah, that's controlling games is a lot better than hanging on for dear life.
But that's the difference. I mean, it's just their ability to keep control of games and not have them sort of wobbling on the rails and then flying off the rails. Even in these moments in which we're up. I mean, think about that DC game early in the year where they were up similarly 2-0 in the second half, and then it just flew off the rails because they couldn't keep control of the game. That's the difference.
Yeah, and it never felt to me like a personnel thing for them either in terms of defense. I feel like they have enough, quality, experienced center backs to where you don't feel like that area of the field is lacking in talent. You don't feel
are they good in that respect? I wouldn't say that, but is there enough talent to be workable?
Yeah, like if you have your tactics right, and if you have the discipline aspect that you were talking about so much over those weeks where they just weren't in the right place in the right times, and they weren't as organized as they needed to be. I think that's definitely the difference. And then think about Claudio Bravo and Juan Mosquera, and the inconsistency at times that has appeared for them this season. They've been better too, and the way you can tell they've been better is you don't notice them in the game as much as you noticed them before. It's funny when you're a fullback and when you're in that position, you sort of exist only to not screw up, right? And the same could probably be said for a center back, but you're noticing them, interfering with the ball a lot more.
They're on the ball more.
They're on the ball more than the outside backs are. So if you're not hearing Juan Mosquera and Claudio Bravo's name as much, with the exception of those sort of moments where Mosquera links up with Moreno or somebody else in the attack, that's a good thing. And I think that the Timbers should be happy about that, even though I do think that they could stand to add some depth there. Eric Miller is obviously a solid veteran type player and a great locker room guy, but that's, as we talked about before, an area that they could improve positionally. But the solidity of the midfield, I think, too, has been a big part of it. David Ajala is a guy that they're really hyped on.
In terms of one player who's really stepped up, I think absolutely Ajala, as he's gotten on the field more and become more consistent. He's sort of bearing out some of the flashes that we saw last year, just in ever so fleeting moments before he got hurt. And that's really exciting, and it's huge. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I had very little beyond that point to make with Ajala. I think he's been great, and I think him next to Diego Chara has been a good pairing. It sucks for Christian Paredes. He's somebody that I think fit really well into what they like to do. It sucks for Eric Williamson, who is somebody that I think deserves a fair shake either here or somewhere else. But we've talked about the duplicity of him and Evander too. But yeah, it's competition. At a certain point, the best players in terms of their performance and dedication and fit are going to end up on the field. And that's a good problem to have, frankly, if you're the Timbers. Is that depth, I think, that they are starting to showcase, particularly in that midfield area. The question will be, what type of additions they might make to further that depth in the coming months. There hasn't been a lot in the way of specific rumors beyond, of course, the soon-to-be departed Dairon Asprilla, who all reports have indicated this will be on Saturday, his final game in a Timbers uniform. As you noted, I hope that they find a good way to honor him. I think the Timbers Army did that. They might have known something or felt like Dairon deserved a shout-out. Coincidentally, last Saturday during the Vancouver game, he was part of the TIFO, which was really cool. But I think that given how things went with Sebastian Blanco, where the writing was sort of on the wall and he didn't necessarily get a goodbye that I think a player of his importance to this club deserves, I think Dairon deserves one for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he's a guy who certainly rode his ups and downs when he was at the club, almost found himself out of favor entirely for a period of time back in, I think it was 2016, maybe 2017. The years get hazy as you get old. But what is extraordinary about him is that he rode those ups and downs. He stayed stuck in, and he found ways to be really, really, really impactful, especially in the second half of his time with the Timbers. That's really extraordinary stuff. You don't see that often. And so the ways that he made an impact were really significant. They were massive goals in big games, in playoff games. They were series advancing goals in playoff games, and in huge moments, and series advancing goals, even in series that led to the championship in 2015. I think you can draw a pretty straight line between Asprilla's contributions in 2015 and being able to get to MLS Cup. And so, I think when you look at his time in the club, he's become and he's made himself a really, really significant figure in the club's MLS existence. And that's something that doesn't come around often. And so it was too bad. It was really too bad when they weren't sort of able to get that send-off moment for Blanco. And I think this is an instance in which probably a text message or two to, our friend Tom Bogert can make sure that he gets it here because he deserves it. And I know this isn't the way that Asprilla necessarily wanted his Timbers career to end. We know that he wanted a new contract. That was made fairly clear earlier in the season. I totally get the decisions for the Timbers in not wanting to offer an extension at this stage of Espria's career and with an option year for 2025. I mean, I get where the Timbers are coming from, and given his role in the team, I don't think that's unreasonable. They have an obligation to sort of put the emotions of that stuff a little bit to the side, and to do what's in the sort of best interest of the roster in light of the salary cap and all of the limitations that come along with that going forward. And I think it's a pretty clear case to be made that it wouldn't make sense to do a multi-year extension for Asprilla at this point.
Yeah, I mean, given the way that the roster rules are set up, like
it's unfortunate, but it's the way it is.
It's not like the NBA where you can sign guys to these sort of like veteran minimums and have them not take up valuable space in a way where they absolutely do in MLS, right? And you got to make way for, as great as Dyrone has been and as fit as he continues to be, and the flashes that he obviously shows at this stage in his career. You got to make way for the new blood, the attacking talent of guys like Anthony and Santiago Moreno, and then maybe whoever else you bring in.
Yeah.
It's hard to find a place for him to fit, but yeah, obviously, like, the moments over the years are undeniable, like the bicycle kicks. I think about the last year, the Timbers Army had the Muppet pictures of everybody up, and Dyrone's was upside down, like, intentionally. And I think about like those like unbelievably exciting moments that stand out over his career. Obviously, he was a solid player and a consistent member of their lineup for years, but those type of exciting moments not only endear somebody to the heart of a fan base, but they grow MLS and they make people around the world pay attention and be more excited about the league, because there's guys like Dyrone Asprilla who can pull off a freaking amazing bicycle kick like that. He was a fun personality to get to know around the team last year too. He's a quiet guy, a little more reserved, but definitely a heartfelt member of the Portland community and somebody that loved this club.
Yeah. And, I think that's why, even if you can sort of step back and from kind of just the rational perspective, understand why a parting of ways might be happening. And from Asprilla's perspective, it's also completely understandable. If he's got a multi-year contract that he can go get somewhere else, totally understand why he would want to do that rather than sort of play out this season with an uncertainty as to whether or not he's going to be able to have a one-year contract here next year. Totally get why he would want to go get that guaranteed deal for multiple years elsewhere, rather than sort of stay here and try to play it out and see how it goes. And so, I think you can step back and just understand why everybody's position is where it is. And why, even if this isn't an optimal outcome for Asprilla, it's one that kind of makes sense. But for all the reasons you just said, I think it would be great. And I think he deserves it. And I think the fans should be given the opportunity to express their gratitude to him for everything that he has contributed over his time here in Portland. That I think has been, it's been a funny arc. I've had a lot of times where I was just like, what's going on with Dyrone Asprilla? Like, where he seemed to be kind of hanging around and really struggling and not finding his footing within the club. And then he would defy expectations, and including my expectations. And through hard work, get himself into a place in which he was a really big contributor. And so I think because of that, you look back on his time with the club with a lot of fondness. And he became a guy who's impossible not to root for.
Next game for the Timbers, and obviously the potential final one for Asprilla, is Saturday against Minnesota. That's at 7:30 p.m. over at Providence Park. Yep, big game for the Timbers against a talented Minnesota United team. Would be a great victory to get at home to continue this turnaround for the Timbers. It's Pride Night at Providence Park, so that'll be a fun affair, as it always is in the Rose City. So the games after that for the Timbers, I mean, they're on the road at Dallas.
But it gets weird. It gets tough. I mean, it's a tough midweek trip to Dallas. That's a long trip for midweek. People in the East don't get this, but Dallas is not close to Portland. Not at all.
No, and FC Dallas Stadium is not close to Dallas.
It's not close to Dallas. That's
either.
Right.
So
you're going out to Frisco. But yeah, I mean, that's a tough midweek trip, and then they come back, I think, on 2 days rest and play Nashville, a team that's kind of been stuttering and struggling a bit. But given the circumstances, it's suboptimal. But look, I mean, the Timbers have been a lot better recently. Obviously, that's not a hot take, but this very much sort of still hangs in the balance. If the Timbers have a good couple of weeks, it's absolutely not impossible that they could be in the top 4. If they have a bad couple of weeks, it's absolutely not impossible that they could be 10th. And so that's kind of where they are. They're really hanging in the balance now, and they've done a good job of being able to get to the point where they're hanging in the balance instead of just being in the in the basement. So it is a good thing that it's in the balance, but it's very much in the balance. And so this is not the time for victory laps. It's not the time for we did it, mission accomplished banners on aircraft carriers. That is not this moment. This is the moment for continuing to keep the nose to the grindstone, because if this surge ebbs, they could very quickly find themselves back in that in sort of the painful place that they were just a few weeks ago.
Speaking of painful places, the Portland Thorns.
Providence Park on Sunday was a painful place.
Hey, it's a beautiful place. The weather was nice. I had some good canned wine and enjoyed the vibe. But the game itself, not great. Very, very unpleasant for Thorns fans. 4-1 loss to Kansas City Current, a team that outmatched Portland in the opening game of the season, which was a little more of a track meet than this game was, and a little more competitive.
This game was a unidirectional track meets.
Yes.
Most track meets, in fairness, you know this well, having been down in Eugene all week, most track meets are unidirectional, run fast, turn left. That's what you do in track. This was also a unidirectional track meet where the Kansas City was running fast and turning left, and the Thorns were turning in circles.
Yeah, and I obviously feel for A-Ting Mo, who fell during the women's 800.
So brutal.
But
the sport's rough, man.
Yeah, sports are rough. The emotions in that moment were brutal. But if I had to compare a sports moment to how the Thorns came out in that first half against KC, it is in the same vein, quite frankly, because it was 3-0 at halftime. It could have been 4-0, could have been 5-0 in like the early portions of the second half after it became 4-0. Soph gets a goal back to make it 4-1 in the end, but it was all for naught. And the Thorns just simply could not defend in space, and it was a reversion to so many of the issues that the Thorns had over the previous year-ish prior to Rob Gale's hiring. And it seems in some ways like the new coach buzz has faded for them, but it is by no means the only reason why they have had this sort of reversion to the mean in these last couple of games. Obviously, that result against the Reign is a lot different than this result against the Current.
Untroubling. I mean, even good, frankly.
Yeah, but this game is a little bit troubling.
Troubling and not good.
For several reasons, because obviously KC is one of the contending teams in NWSL, still haven't lost a freaking game. And you think about the similarities between them and a team like Orlando, that you don't want to get to the postseason and not be prepared for a team like this in the way that the Thorns simply were not prepared for the Current on Sunday.
Yeah, I think they got two big things wrong. One, the setup was wrong. Two, the execution was wrong. Which is to say, everything was wrong. I don't like the setup and the way Rob Gale set the team up in this game. This is like very just kind of tactics 101, maybe even not quite the 101. It's like if you don't qualify to get into the 101 for some reason and you have to take like a summer course before the 101, this is like that. Where they're like showing you all the lines on the field and what they mean. The Thorns really, really tried in this game to defend in a 4-3-3. They wanted to keep their wingers high. The challenge with the 4-3-3, and you hear this talked about all the time, is that as a defensive structure, it's just a really unstable one. And like, just to reinforce how basic this is, it's because you're defending in your block with one less person. Because usually you're in your blocks of 4. Instead, you're in a block of 4 in defense and then a block of 3 in midfield. And so naturally, where's the space going to be? The space is going to be out wide, right? Because you're playing with 3 central midfielders rather than 2 central midfielders and 2 wingers defending in that block. And so the space is going to be out wide. And so when you're defending in a 4-3-3, and look, lots of teams do it. It's actually kind of in vogue. But you've got to have a central midfield that's built right? Because you've got to have a central midfield. You need to be able to defend from the front a little bit to start. You need your front line to be really sharp in pressing and in the rest of defense, and to push opponents into the right directions. Because if opponents are able to break out onto the wings in those moments, when they recover the ball, that's when they're going to be in a position to exploit the narrowness in your defensive block, right? I didn't think the Thorns did a great job with that. But second, you've got to make sure that central midfield block of 3 really has a good amount of mobility to it. They've got to be able to just cover the spaces, right? And to be able to make the rotations quickly, to provide support to the fullbacks when the opponent does get onto the wings. And this block that the Thorns played on Sunday just wasn't able to do that. Megan Klingenberg in an unfamiliar role, kind of as the 6, I just wasn't up to that difficult job. And it's a difficult job. I want to reinforce it's a difficult job. She wasn't up to it. And you know, which I think is less on her and more about the position that she was put in. And then neither Hina Sugita nor Jessie Fleming. Fleming, I thought, had a pretty frustrating game, but they're not sort of, defense primarily players, right? Which is a long way of saying that Sam Coffey is super important to that midfield. My goodness gracious. Super important to that central midfield. And there was a giant Sam Coffey shaped hole in it. And as a result, I think the fullbacks were out on an island through much of the game. And I keep wanting to call them the Courage. For some reason, the Current, I mean, they kind of rhyme, but they're completely different soccer teams. And the Current were just vicious in how they exploited that. With respect to the execution
I think about
part,
Nicole Payne as a good example. She really struggled. I felt bad for her because it was less a product of her individual play, which I think she did her best. It was just like she was left alone. And you remember last year, like how Kling would get left alone when teams would get out on the counter against her, and she'd be drowning. And it felt like that for her at times, for Payne. So,
and I think maybe even equally so for Marie Muller on the other side. And so, I think there was just that structural problem that the Current were really well set up to exploit. They were vicious about exploiting, and that should have been something that the coaching staff was able to foresee and make some different choices going into this game. I think they dropped the ball on it, and I think they were ripe for the picking. And the Current were all too happy to do the picking. The other thing that I think was a problem that made this an even worse performance than it otherwise would have been, an even more lopsided result, is the Thorns were just soft as cluck in this game. Just so soft. There were so many opportunities for the Thorns in those moments in which the Current got into space. There were so many opportunities for the Thorns to get stuck into a tackle that only has 2 outcomes, right? One being you win the ball and you win the challenge and you're going the other way. The other being that you foul the opposing player and it's a free kick. And there are times, especially in a team that is as athletic as the Current and that likes to play in space as much as the Current, there are times, and there are a lot of them, frankly, in a game like that where that second outcome is not a bad outcome. I mean, it's sort of the old saying of the ball might get by me or the player might get by me, but both aren't getting by me. And you need to be willing to do that. You need to have some of that hardness in a game like this to play against a team like the Current, because they're really good and they're really dangerous in that space. You need to have the willingness to do that. And there were so many times where both the ball and the player were getting by. And that just, I mean, in a high level game like that, I know you don't want to give away needless set pieces, but those aren't needless set pieces. Those are the fouls that you're happy to take. And I know the Thorns had some issues on defending set pieces in this game too. So I'm not saying that this would have entirely flipped the result, but it's a lot better than the alternative. of Chewinga and Davinia and all the others in the Casey attack just running at your back line. It's a lot better than that. And unfortunately, that was the outcome more often than not in this game.
Right. And you would rather play the percentages of a set piece. I mean, Labonta hit a what was like essentially a screamer there.
Yeah.
And that was tremendous. I think that, you know, they are a good team in those situations. But yes, of course, you would rather play those percentages than leave the game as open as it was. I think about an individual player like Kelly Hubley, who, despite the Thorns' struggles defending, I think had a tremendous game. She has really long legs and sticks them out in the way of the ball all the time in ways that I think a lot of other center backs might not necessarily have the ability to do. And I think that, yeah, as somebody who at the start of the season, she sort of fell out of favor in the lineup, has made herself a mainstay in these last few games. So, you know, credit to her, but again, it's a situational thing, right? She can only do so much. She can only save you so many times. Becky Sauerbrunn can only save you so many times before the wall breaks down.
And it totally did. I mean, the dam broke, and it was, forget about it.
Yeah, and you know, the current, I think they're a very talented team. I think that they have a lot of really interesting pieces, but I don't think that they are like the Thorns when fully healthy, or like the Thorns of 2 years ago, in the sense that they don't overwhelm you with talent to the point where it's just like, you know, you have no chance against a team like that. And going back to that championship game where the Thorns beat the Current, it was very evident from first whistle that was the case.
More talented Current team now, in fairness, but
more talented than that Current team for sure. But when we're comparing like championship caliber teams, I think that the tactical approach and the organization that this Current team has under Vlatko and Andonovski has been evident all season long. It's the reason why they're undefeated. And U.S. Women's National Team fans have
was this with?
I was going to say, have plenty to say about where
this ruthless, decisive in possession, like you know, just totally vicious attack. Where was this?
Yeah, who knows? Maybe it's not maybe. It definitely is harder to, I think, coach a national team and to get players organized together who have their, you know, different egos, have their different.
Where was this?
Yeah. It's where was it? That is the question U.S. Women's National Team fans are asking. We might as well start talking about them. The team was announced for the Olympics, 18 players, as we noted, a very small roster for
ridiculous
for the Olympics. Alex Morgan not on it. That's obviously the big headliner. Something that, you know, if you're around these women's soccer circles, folks probably could have anticipated, given the young attacking talent that this U.S. team has. But obviously Alex Morgan is Alex Morgan, so that's a BFD that she's not on the roster. Different players from around NWSL made the team, including obviously Sophia Smith and Sam Coffey.
Going to be a Sam Coffey size hole in the Thorns midfield again.
Yeah, once again, when she's at the Olympics, but not as much of a worry, considering, you know, it was the injury that kept her out before, versus now there's going to be less games to play during this Olympic window for the Thorns than there was, you know, crucial ones that you would have had her available. But just thoughts on that roster generally, just taking a look at it, and the U.S. and their opportunity to sort of, you know, turn a corner in the Olympics and under Emma Hayes get back to maybe where they need to be.
From just a purely sporting perspective, I think it's a really good roster. I think in many ways, the Morgan decision is kind of reflective of the overall point, but it gives me a lot of excitement that you've got somebody like Emma Hayes coming in and who's willing to make courageous calls like that. Those are the calls that have not been made by coaches in the past. To take somebody who has a track record that I think is indisputably legendary, and say, you know what, you're not part of the best 18 right now, and that happens at this stage of this career, and that's okay. We can still respect everything that you've done. You can still be a really significant part of this program, but you're not on this roster. And having the courage to come in and say that when I think it is the right decision on the merits, and based on what we've seen, I think is really exciting. And that's something that we haven't seen from, certainly that we didn't see from Andonovski and during his tenure, even though it was called for on multiple fronts. We had a lot of veterans and a lot of players who had been in positions and had kind of just been okay, who kind of just lingered for a long time. And Emma Hayes needed one camp to make a hard choice like this. And it's a hard choice. Because, the respect for Alex Morgan is tremendous for good reason. But to come in and in the space of one camp, be willing to make a hard choice like that is, I think, something that should have women's national team fans very, very excited about the trajectory of this team. I still think there's more work to be done. I'm guarded in sort of my expectations on the field for this team at the Olympics, but from a sporting side, it's a good roster. It's a roster that shows the guts that are necessary sometimes to put the best team on the field. And so overall, I'm excited about it.
Yeah, and one more note on the national team before we circle back a little bit to the Thorns at the end here. Mallory Swanson, fully healthy, is looking like a serious pairing with Sophia Smith. That's going to be exciting for fans.
That front three, the conceptual possibilities of the front three between Sophia Smith, Mallory Swanson, and Trinity Rodman are scary. And I think that's what Emma Hayes is seeing here. I think she's looking at that group and being like, if I can get that group clicking together, we're a problem for every team in the world. Every team in the world would look at that front three and be terrified. And I think that's what she's seeing. And I think she's looking at that and saying, I have 18 players that I can bring in 4 alternates, but 18 players that I can bring to Paris. If I'm going to bring those 3, is there really room for Alex Morgan on my roster? And I think the answer is probably no, especially when you've got Crystal Dunn, who can play up there, but can also be a little bit more of a multi-tool.
Yeah, and listed as a forward too, which is compelling in its own way. And Jaden Shaw, obviously, is somebody that's coming into her own.
Who's in pin on rosters right now.
No doubter. And speaking of her, speaking of Morgan and the Wave.
This is madness.
Yeah, this
stroke of madness. Jill Ellis has lost her mind. The madness.
the Wave fired their coach Casey Stoney this week, which was a big surprise to people in the NWSL world.
Stupid.
Yeah.
Just dumb. Oh my gosh, I can't believe this.
So there could very well be more to that story. We don't know. There's been rumblings about front office, conflict, this, that, or the other. We won't necessarily speculate as to that, but it seems to be for sporting reasons for a team that doesn't seem to have a lot of sporting reasons.
Madness.
And doesn't seem to have a lot of, better alternatives in the short and long term right now. But it ties into the Thorns because, as we talked about off air, they are searching for a coach. Rob Gale,
an open seat.
Yeah, there's theoretically an open seat, and Rob Gale has done a great job so far, and that seemed to have cooled off a bit these last couple weeks. But I don't think much has changed about the team's perspective on Gale. But Stoney is somebody that, if you're the Thorns and you're serious about getting the best possible coach out there, you'd find few bigger names with better credentials than Casey Stoney.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's not a hot take to say this is an insane decision by the Wave. In their first season, the Wave shocked everybody. Everybody thought the Wave were by far the second most talented of the 2 expansion teams that came in 3 years ago between them and Angel City. And they shocked everybody by being by far the better of the 2 and making the playoffs. Last year, they won the Shield. I don't really put a whole lot in the Challenge Cup thing this year, but I guess that's another trophy. But last year, they won the Shield. It goes to the best team in the league. They were. Those are their first 2 teams, 2 years in existence. That's unbelievable. And to get halfway into a season, and it has been a frustrating, disappointing first half for the Wave, no question at all. There's no real conversation to be had about that. but they're like, it's not like they're sitting on 4 points and they're in last place by 10 points or something. They're in ninth. Disappointing, not where they expect to be given the success they've had in the last couple of years, but like, it happens.
Yeah, it's one of those situations where you think that like if they were going to make a move like this, and this might be the point that you were getting toward, you'd think it would have to come after the end of a disappointing season where, yes, you struggled in the first half, but then you also didn't make the playoffs in the end or something. With the coach of that caliber, it's surprising.
It's madness.
And the fit with the Thorns is the thing that ties this into our audience.
I think that's an interesting question. I think a lot of Casey Stoney as a coach. And look, I get that San Diego's brand of soccer wasn't always the most exciting. I totally get that. It was, however, by and large, exceptionally effective. And they were disciplined. They were really clear in their ideas. I mean, frankly, they're the team that I didn't enjoy watching them play against the Thorns because it was frustrating as a fan, but I really appreciated the way they approached the game, especially from a defensive perspective. They were so clean. Their ideas were so clear. The trigger points were just obvious, which I say that as a compliment. When a team is so organized that you can just sit in the stands, watch them, and be like, when this happens, they do this. That is organization. And that comes from really good coaching. I mean, they were frankly the team that in many respects was the easiest to analyze because they were just so clear in their ideas. They were so unified in how they were executing them. And so, I mean, if I'm Carino LeBlanc, do I call Casey Stoney? I absolutely do. And I'm not even saying that means I would absolutely hire her over Rob Gale. I think Gale has a bit of runway yet. But do I establish that connection? Yeah. Yeah. Are you kidding me? Yeah. I mean, you've got arguably the best coach from NWSL in the last couple of years that just hit the market because the leadership in San Diego just did something insane. You'd be nuts not to reach out and at least establish that connection, gauge interest, and see sort of what Stoney's timeline is. And frankly, you'd be nuts not to consider it seriously.
Yeah. And, people have talked about the struggle ball thing a little bit with when they, they haven't played the prettiest soccer in the world, like you pointed out in recent years. But I don't think that would prevent somebody like Stoney from having success with this Thorns team, particularly with the level of attacking talent on this Thorns roster. It's not like, in Casey Stoney's system where they're firing balls in from a wide area. It's not like that's going to happen every single time down the field. And it's not like when Sophia Smith gets the ball at her feet that Casey Stoney's going to be like, oh, no, please don't turn with the power of somebody twice your size and sprint down the field faster than anybody else. Please don't do. We want you to go through our tactical approach, please. No, that's not going to happen.
And there's no reason to think that the way San Diego has played the last couple of years is the only way that Stoney can coach a team. Coaches evolve and they change and they bring different ideas to different teams because sometimes different teams require different ideas. But when you have a coach that can help a team establish as clear an identity as San Diego had, that is what you want. Sort of, I mean, and I'm a little bit agnostic about what that identity is and whether there are good identities or bad identities. I think there are multiple ways to win soccer games. You can have teams with different identities and be good teams. But the ability to instill an identity is, I think, the primary thing that distinguishes good coaches from not good coaches. And Stoney, I think, absolutely demonstrated the last couple of years, notwithstanding the struggles in the first half of this year, absolutely demonstrated in the last couple of years that she can instill an identity on a team that will allow that team to be successful. And so, yeah, I'm absolutely calling if I'm in the Thorns leadership to establish that connection. I'm very seriously considering it. And, I mean, in terms of Rob Gale, I think Gale has done a creditable job in taking over the Thorns. I think he has made a pretty compelling case for himself, notwithstanding, I think, some errors in the way the team was set up this last week, and probably him having his worst game as a coach, as a head coach this last week. Notwithstanding all that stuff, I think he's done a really creditable job with the Thorns team. And so I'm by no means, sort of Gale out kind of guy. But I am also not Gale forever or Gale in forever. Gale for life. I don't know what the hashtag would be.
Gale Force wins. Maybe?
Yeah, I don't know, but I'm not there either, and I think the Thorns leadership shouldn't be there either. I think they need to look around and see what the options are, and if Casey Stoney is one of the options, that's going to be a really compelling decision, the really compelling option to have to make. And so, I think that's sort of where I land, which isn't a, super hot take directive. They need to do this or that kind of thing. But yeah, if Casey Stoney is available, you're going to really consider that, even notwithstanding Gale doing a pretty good job.
Next game for the Thorns, Saturday at Utah Royals. That's at 7 p.m. I'm not going to say the name of the field. It's a credit union, but it's a phrase that I will not be saying on this podcast.
Totally unrelated.
Totally unrelated field. So that's Saturday, 7 p.m. against the Royals. Congrats to Chris and Jackie. They're getting married.
Thanks.
Very excited for the two of you. You can follow Chris on Twitter. He won't be tweeting much these next couple weeks.
Yeah, if you see me tweeting about the game on Saturday evening, I'm in big trouble.
Yeah.
Big trouble if I'm tweeting about that game live.
Yeah. Jackie might have the noties on to make sure he isn't tweeting about the game. But congrats to both of them. Chris Reifer, Ryan T. Clark on Twitter. Follow us wherever you get your pods. Like, subscribe, do all that good stuff. Thanks for joining us.